Ladies and gentlemen, we have with us today, and before I do the drum roll, let's keep our fingers crossed and hope that it actually works. So,
Tech.
yes, Jon Isaacson, and I say that because I always have technical difficulties at the beginning of everything. It never
Yep.
works. It lags. So, yours worked great. So we're off to a good start. Um, so before we get into your writing, Jon, just tell me a little bit about yourself. Who is Jon? Where are you from? What do you like to do in your free time?
My name's Jon Isaacson. I am a contractor in Puyallup, Washington. So most people are familiar with the state of Washington. They think of Seattle. If you go down the I-5, you'll hit Tacoma, and then if you go east, you'll find a small town, Puyallup. And you said, so we got a construction company. I have a podcast for contractors, the Diojo podcast, written a few books, which is the reason we're here on a book author podcast. And then in my free time, last night I played indoor soccer. We've got 4 kids. They're all in high school now, so they have less and less use for us. So I've been able to develop some hobbies. I like to plunk around on the guitar and hang out with my wife and like I said, play soccer and then write.
Cool. Yeah. So how'd you get into writing? I feel like writing it attracts a very specific type of person to it. So how did you get into writing?
Well, I didn't have a face for the movies, so had to find out otherwise. No, I feel probably, I guess, early influences. I enjoyed reading. That's one. I had an uncle that self-published some books, so that interested me or showed that that was even possible. And then I had started writing in our industry. There's some trade magazines. Had started writing a few articles for some of the trade magazines, and a couple of those resonated with people. So I felt like had something to say that was resonating with other people, that was helpful experiences that I had that was helping them with what they were doing. So that encouraged me to
So
explore it further. Yeah.
cool. So the title of your book is "So You Want to Be a Project Manager,"
Yeah.
and we were briefly chatting before this. You said, "Hey, usually you like to talk about dragons and magic and spaceships and smut and all that stuff," which I love. I love all the fiction writing, but I also got a soft spot in my heart for nonfiction and business books and stuff like that. So, for my general audience who might not know this, in my day job, and yes, I do have one of those because it's hard to be an author and not have a day job.
Yep.
Um, I work for a tech company and we make software for restoration companies. And so what that means ultimately is like if you have a fire or a flood in your house, somebody has to come in and clean that, and we make job management software for them. So
Yep.
Jon here, he has written a book. He's a SME on being a project manager. So you wrote to me, you said, for those who want to advance their careers with specific applications for project managers in the skilled trades. So tell me a little bit about your background and experience and what makes you an expert on the subject.
Uh, Not an expert. Just wrote a book. Just trying to make money. No, podcast wasn't making money, so I figured I had to go another route.
Well, I guess I should write a
Actually,
book then.
well, I was going to ask you that. Art is. I know you're interested in authors. Is that something that you're working on, or?
Yeah, so I'm unpublished because my books are never good enough yet. I always got to make changes to them. I do have a finished manuscript and two half-finished manuscripts, and they're fiction novels.
In the fiction? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I said off camera, the first book I published, our mutual friend Rachel Stewart wrote a book, Unqualified Success. And I'm proud not only that it came from our industry, but it's one of the best self-help books I've ever read. My wife's not a big reader. She read it and loved it. But I called her and I was working on kind of the manuscript for my first book, and I said, I just don't know if I have something unique to offer. And she said something really helpful. She said, there isn't anything new, unique, or new, right? They're all the same ideas. It's your unique application of whatever the principles that you've learned are. And so if you feel like you got something, get it out there. And that was really encouraging. That's kind of the whole point of her book. And if anybody's listening and wanting to write, like your first articles, your first books are going to be terrible, right? But almost exactly that, the habit of getting it out there, getting some feedback from people, you might actually find that there's more people that are interested in what you're interested than you thought, and that content can be helpful, whether it's fiction, kind of stepping outside, or nonfiction to maybe help you advance in your career. So that was the purpose behind. I've written an estimating book, a book on workplace culture, and then this is actually the third book. So you want to be a project manager,
Okay.
and written to try to help people advance in their career that want to be in the industry that we work in from 9 to 5.
Mhm. Now, are you specifically in reconstruction or construction rather, or do you do any restoration as well?
Currently, the company that we have just does the reconstruction. I got my start. I started in our industry in 2002, I believe, in mold remediation of all things. I was on the tail end of the mold is gold era. Um, so for those people that aren't in the industry, there was a period of time where insurance companies paid for mold remediation. You'd find mold in your house and they'd pay to get rid of it. And they've over time found ways to not be as helpful or to exclude those things. So yeah, but there's plenty of other podcasts about that topic. We're talking about books, right? So
So, what obviously you saw a need to write this book about project management. Were there any like specific events or people that you came across that made you decide to do this?
yeah, in our industry, I think everyone can resonate with this. There's always, that middle management that they're like, who can we get to do that? Oh, just give it to the project managers. And so in our industry, it's a key step. Unfortunately, I think it's really viewed by a lot of people or treated by a lot of people as a stepping stone rather than like like an art form and a real skill set that's essential. We've tried in our business to change the way the primary thing is project management, because that's your people management, your customer management, your subcontractor management, or contractors, employees. And so it's a difficult position, I think, across the board in the skilled trades. It's a supervisory role that has different levels of freedom and authority, but usually is the scapegoat if something goes wrong. And so I think a lot of people, that project management can be applied to many different industries. And I think if I had the talent for it, you could, and you probably could translate that frustration into a really good fantasy piece, you know, to fuel that. So
So, you mentioned a couple of the difficulties just now, but what makes being a project management manager so difficult? Like in the day to day, what makes people bang their heads against a wall? And I can tell you from my experience, but I want to hear it out of your mouth.
yeah, I'd love to hear your perspective. I know that the company that you work for, that's one of the pieces. So especially in insurance work, you're expected to have some level of technical knowledge, especially if you're a project manager. Very typically in our industry, people are hired that have a lot of construction knowledge. And I don't know that the consumer fully understands this, or, say even like my wife just had a medical procedure, right? So some of the most talented people that are technically skilled, they focus so much of their life on that technical skill that their other skills, like people skills and bedside manner, don't exist. And so for some of us, that's encouraging, right? Like, okay, you've developed your technical skill. You're not very good dealing with people or communicating, but you're good. When I'm under anesthesia and you're digging around in my innards, that's what you're good at. So it's very hard to both be a super skilled carpenter that knows every facet of framing and drywall and flooring and all these other finishes, but also be really good at dealing with customers, also be great with technology, also be great with haggling with subcontractors, make sure schedules are on track, budgets, materials are coming in, and especially with the last couple of years we've had with, procurement and those kinds of things. So you're expected to do a lot of things well. And any one of those things, if you don't do it well, customer's not happy, or the project's not on track, or the budget's off. And, well, how come you don't know how to do all 14 things excellently?
Hmm. Yeah. So of those 14 things, obviously you can learn all of them in your book. But if someone were to if someone were to come fresh off the street and say, I want to be a project manager, what skills should I have coming into this? What are some natural skills?
Ooh. Well, if by chance, hopefully we're not totally boring any people that are into fantasy. Again, remember, project management is the scapegoat in a company or somebody that's expected to do everything and always takes the blame. So I think everyone can resonate with that. But on the chance that there's people from our industry listening to this, project management is a customer service role, and everything is moving towards customer service. So like your technology does, maybe take away, or there's so much duplication or multiple data points that you have to input data that are critical to these companies that are gobbling up smaller companies. Data fuels a lot of our decisions, so it's important. But anything you can do to reduce those constraints on a project manager actually being people skilled. So a lot of companies, like I said, are looking for technical skills and expecting you then to just magically develop these people skills. So I think forward-thinking companies more and more are going to be looking for people that have good communication skills, good people skills, can stay calm under pressure. So I think there's three main baskets that of skill sets that you have to draw from. It's project management. You need to have some level of technical knowledge. People management is probably the biggest piece, and then process management, being able to duplicate it, over and over again and adapt. But I would think if you want to be a part of a forward-thinking company, I think you'd probably agree, even in the work that you do, the people skills is so underserved, unfortunately, that if you can come with that, I think you can learn all of the rest, or at least be competent enough to be, maybe you don't have all of the carpentry skills, but you can rely on your subcontractors if you have the right amount of people skills.
And, it's interesting you bring up the people skills. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Simon Sinek, um, modern
Yep, familiar.
author, philosopher, maybe. However you want to throw him in a bucket. But he said, and to paraphrase terribly here, he said, people as they get better and better at their jobs, eventually they get thrown into a position where they are managing the people who do the work instead of doing the work themselves. And
Yep.
so I love how you brought up people skills are super important for project management because interpersonal communication and organization are really like all of the job if
Yeah.
other people are doing the work for you.
Yep.
And one other thing that you mentioned that I kind of want to pivot the conversation to now is data and technology. So I think you've been in the industry probably a little bit longer than I have. How has technology changed in the last maybe 20 years as to what it is now?
Well, you probably can comment more on that than myself. Would you say, are you ever astounded by how low tech some of the biggest organizations are in our industry, or
Yes.
how poorly constructed the technology is that we're being expected to utilize or required to utilize?
Absolutely. I when I first came into the industry, I love playing video games. And
Yep.
so we had a software that we would use for it was our CRM basically. And it was
Okay.
so slow and so terrible, even to pull up like notes or to load a file. And it was so slow. And
Yep.
I'm in my head, I'm like, I can play video games with someone across the world and have zero lag. And
Yep.
there's like,
Yeah.
300 FPS and
Yep.
people are typing and there's all these graphics going on, but this system can't even like get a
Transfer a
file to
Word
get to
document.
pull up. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
crazy. So Technology has definitely been a struggle ever since I've been introduced to the industry, which is kind of like why I found myself at Accelerate. Um, because I think we can empower contractors to use technology to their benefit instead of being scared of it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, one example, I think I talk about it in both books, or the estimating book and the project management book, is photos. I mean, even I started in 2002. The cream of the crop tech was a Sony Mavica that ran off a 3.5-inch floppy. So if you didn't properly format your photos, I mean, you're getting like 12 photos a disc. And then if the adjuster wants the photos, you're mailing them your floppies. And later on, 2010, I went to a much larger company, and they still had not invested in, at that time, photos on your phones were available, and even date stamp photos, and they were so resistant to making those change or investing in that for their techs because they'll just break the phones. Well, meanwhile, they got these beat up, generation one digital cameras that are duct taped and everything. That's like, if it's a requirement of the job, we should be providing people with the tools that create the least amount of barrier to them accomplishing that and actually doing the work that we want them to do. And so it's just, there's a resistance, I think, in a lot of companies. There's a misalignment of training people in the importance of how and why to take care of the technology or the tools. And I think to some degree, Undercover Boss has done a good job of reminding people in the positions of leadership to, before you complain about the lack of compliance from people on your team, maybe just spend a couple hours in the field using the tools you're asking them to use and see if your opinion changes. So I think the technology has caught up in a lot of ways to make things a lot easier, but the implementation is lagging, and that's
Mhm.
people are like, well, I didn't have that when I was doing it, so why would my team need it?
Yeah. Well, so there's that old school mentality of, let's do instead of doing dry logs, let's do the wet knee test and kneel down on the ground. And if my knee comes up
Sure.
wet, then it's still wet, right? I've heard that. But there's this mentality of, contractors, they don't want to use the technology, or my tool is a hammer. Why should I use a cell phone or something like
Sure.
that? And I think we don't
Yeah.
give contractors enough credit. Like if you can use Facebook, you can use almost any of these technologies.
Yeah.
They're made to be simple and they're made to make your life easier.
Well, on the flip side to that too, if you're old school and your skill set's elsewhere, hire people that understand it and take that burden off of you. Like you don't, again, the idea, the contractor that writes the try copy, estimate in the field from his metal clipboard, does the calculations, sketches the drawings themselves, gets them stamped over the counter and takes care of everything from start to finish. It's doable. It's still doable, but you're not going to scale a company that way. So you have to find, what are you good at, and then get people around you that are good at all the other stuff, and set the parameters up so that they're accountable, but let them loose. Set them free to do the things that you hired them to do,
Yeah.
rather than being like a stopgap for advancement.
And that goes back again to the people skills that you're talking about, like putting
Yeah,
people in the appropriate role and seeing that is going to be instrumental in making sure the organization grows and scales and is efficient. Because if you're putting a carpenter where the plumber should be, or someone who's great with technology
sure.
putting a hammer in their hand, but
Yeah.
it might not work out for them the other way.
Yeah, yeah, the guy that's great at flooring, and then you put him in a position where you're asking him to finish drywall. It's not that he's dumb or incapable. It just, that's not a skill set he's spent years developing. So it's a misalignment of their value. To say, well, how come you couldn't hang this drywall in 2 hours? Well, I'm a floor guy. So
So going back to your book, what are a couple applicable things that project managers could learn? You don't have to spill all the beans of your book. Just give me one or two.
yeah, well. The purpose, and I think it might have been pretty broad. It's a pretty thick book, so you could read it all the way through or use it more, as certain things come up. So I try to address some of the, if you're thinking that you don't have the skill set, and you need to develop it, these are some of the mindset and habits that'll help you develop into that role. I talk a little bit about to some of the business owners, some of the ways to approach, project management that maybe will be more effective. And then also people that get into that first level of management, just understanding. I think the key there is just like you said, you will be moving from success is you doing your job well to success now becomes how can you help other people do their job well. And exactly like we've been talking about, that's going to look a little bit different for everybody, and that's okay. Trying to figure out how do these people learn, how can I help them, and develop their skills. And so, but also giving yourself the room to understand you're going to make mistakes, and it's important to make mistakes and to learn from them, and then to keep moving on.
Mhm. So, let's pivot again a little bit here and let's talk about publishing and marketing. So, what
Okay.
has that been like for you? Are you self-published or traditionally published?
Yeah, I actually I thought my first book, the second book is called Be Intentional Culture, and it's a collective. There's several authors that contributed chapters to trying to take culture, workplace culture, and make it something simple. One simple thing that you've done that's helped build your culture, and one simple thing that maybe you tried that, kind of blew up in your face. And so that was going to be with a publisher, someone that had already done the steps, and they're going to help with marketing. And my thought was, if we do this collaborative book, then everybody else that's written would help, spread the message, and that creates a nice foundation for my solo book. And some things fell out, and it was pre 2020. I think I did release that in 2020, my first book in 2020, but I didn't think it was then fair. I was going to have to self-publish, is basically, and I didn't think it was fair to have my first test project be this collaborative work. So I kind of put that on pause and started working more intentionally on the first estimating book. And so learning Amazon, I went through Amazon Kindle Direct Publishing, for Kindle, and then the paperback as well. So that was quite a learning curve. It's doable, and thankfully there's plenty of videos and articles out there that kind of help. The formatting probably is the hardest part, to get it to line up exactly the way you want it to line up. And if you're self-publishing, you do it yourself, you're limited to your skill set as far as, the graphics and those kinds of things. But I found it to be pretty doable. So that's the publishing portion. The marketing is a whole nother avenue, right? So if you're DIY, I have people send me emails all the time, we'll get you on this list and that list, and all you got to do is pay this. And, there's everything I've heard from people, there's, if you're doing pay to play, you maybe get your numbers up, but not necessarily your engagement. So you're probably better off trying to do it as organically as possible, and figuring out ways like this, like yourself, finding like-minded, interested people, maybe groups on Facebook, those kinds of things where you can plug it in here and there. I think ultimately, even if you're writing a fiction book, you're trying to be of value to others in some way, right? Whether that's just, I want to give you a quality thing that at night when you're winding down, you've got something to read that takes you to a whole nother world. It's a really phenomenal skill for someone that can write fantasy well, or any book well. So I would say, from the marketing standpoint, you're just going to have to be on the verge of annoying, if not annoying, and feel okay with that, right? And put it in friggin' TikTok. One book I read said, which is funny for our industry, if everyone else is doing it, don't. That's kind of one of the principles of guerrilla marketing. So if all your competition is somewhere else, find some path, that's different, unless it's true, tried and true, and you know that it works. But it's probably going to be so saturated, it's going to be very hard to be the guy starting, or gal or author starting out, and make any kind of waves. So find some way that no one else is doing. And it seems like right now, a lot of people are adverse to TikTok, and even as we talk about it, it's kind of an aging technology. So there's going to be something else, So
Wise
I don't
words.
have any. Yeah, yeah. I don't have any secrets other than, the trick is online is the right wording that it catches the robot's attention, but the right content that it still resonates with people. And I think that's still an art form. So you have all this work that you put into getting a book, and then a whole nother set of, well, how the heck do I get it out there? I personally have decided, I'm just going to try to the best of my ability, DIY it. I will say, to the authors out there, if you can get pieces of your manuscript out to people that are interested or will give you good feedback, I think that's a great way to get some feedback, create some initial excitement. Maybe you offer something like, 10 free copies to the first people that, review X number of pages. I do think send them shorter rather than longer, because it's kind of a big ask to say, hey, read 1,000 pages and give me your feedback. But at the same time, if you're only sending them a short bit, then they only get a certain piece of it. But, send a dozen pages to a dozen people, and then there's your initial reviews, and hopefully they're going to be looking for that when it goes out. That, I guess that's one maybe little trick. Maybe everybody knows that, maybe they don't.
Okay, awesome. So as we're wrapping up here, obviously your book is meant to be read by individuals to hone their project management skills. But what do you hope that your book will bring to the industry as a whole?
Um, that honestly, I think I said that in the book too, is maybe just a broader, better understanding and respect for the role. And like we've been talking about, rather than burning out really quality people, thinking, what is a way we can approach this role differently? Because the market's aggressively changing. Technology, like, a lot of people are resistant to it because, I could invest a bunch of money in this and it may do nothing. And some of that is the implementation or getting the right tech that aligns with what your people are doing. But I hope it's a encouragement to people that want to get into leadership, roles of leadership, and as well as people that are creating those opportunities to think maybe more intentionally about how they broadcast that, what we're actually looking for, and having more reasonable metrics so that people can succeed in performing those functions.
Well,
That would be
thank
my
you so much
fantasy.
for, I'm sorry, what was that?
That would be my fantasy.
Okay. Well, you can write a book about your fantasy.
Yeah, we'll see.
All right. Well, Jon, thank you so much. And I appreciate you coming on. We'll give you a final round of applause here.
Oh, there we go.